"Get down on the ground," yells a man in a knockoff security vest, pointing a handgun at my 78-year-old grandfather, who's holding nothing but a garden hose. Sirens wail somewhere nearby. My mom's voice breaks into a scream. And just as pretend cop Ken starts to grasp that he's seriously screwed up, two blacked-out SUVs skid to a stop, and out pours my uncle's FBI team, weapons drawn, fully locked and loaded. And no, this isn't some Hollywood script. This is what goes down when a Karen-fueled fake HOA decides to play soldier in the wrong zip code. Freeze frame. Yep, that's me. The guy whose private well Karen illegally tapped into to water her petunias. So what did I do? I sent raw sewage through her irrigation lines. And trust me, that was just the warm-up. You're probably thinking, wait, hold on, how is that even legal? And how did she not realize? Let's rewind. 2 months earlier, I was minding my own business, living in my late mom's old house, helping care for my grandpa while trying to find a job after grad school burnout collided with a post-pandemic job market mess. Grandpa's a quiet guy, Korean War vet, gentle soul, with a garden so pristine the local bees practically send him thank you notes. The neighborhood was meant to be a peaceful retirement spot. Keyword, meant. Enter Karen. But not just any Karen, a full-throttle Karen. Blonde bob, clipboard fused to her hand, a purse big enough to store a weather balloon, and a voice like a smoke alarm mid-breakdown. She dubbed herself president of the Neighborhood Standards Committee, which, for the record, wasn't real. She insisted we were part of an HOA. We weren't. No bylaws, no board, no city approval. Just Karen, her home printer, and the iron conviction she was born to rule. At first, it was all just noise. Post-it notes slapped on doors about crooked trash cans. Snide remarks about unauthorized paint colors on sheds. Grandpa chuckled. Guy made it through battlefield shelling. Karen's Comic Sans wasn't about to rattle him. Then came Ken. Ken was Karen's new boyfriend. Camo cargo shorts, a vest that said security even though no one hired him, and sunglasses so dark he probably used sonar. He walked like he binge-watched Cops and thought it counted as training. His legal clout? On par with wet cardboard. Worst part? He packed heat. Not in the open, but you could see the shape under his vest, like a secret he was dying to show off. First time I met him, he was stomping around the block, shouting into a walkie-talkie. Alone. No one to talk to. Just me trimming the hedges. Then he showed up, squinting like I'd declared war on his lawn. "Do you have a permit for that tool?" I blinked. "You mean the hedge clippers?" He nodded, like I'd just confessed to sabotage. Manual tools can be hazardous if not regularly inspected. Per HOI regulations, they require an annual safety check. "HOI?" I asked. He leaned in, voice low, like he was passing state secrets. "It's real. Not everyone's caught on yet." I walked inside and laughed until I cried. Grandpa didn't laugh. He looked out the window and said, "Guys like that don't stay funny forever." He was right. The next week, a notice arrived. Grandpa's small flag in the flower bed was deemed excessively patriotic and could potentially spark international tensions. I wish I was joking. Karen had printed it in Comic Sans. Then came noise complaints about Grandpa's sprinkler. The thing barely whispered. I even recorded it and ran a decibel check. Ken didn't care. Claimed Grandpa's weaponized water dispersion disrupted auditory harmony in the neighborhood. When I asked what the hell that meant, he handed me a citation and a pamphlet, Understanding Tactical Landscaping. I wanted to laugh it off, but Grandpa was starting to feel cornered. That garden meant everything to him. It was the last project he and Grandma worked on before she passed. Seeing him hesitate with the hose lit a fire in me. I started documenting everything. Clips, snapshots, time-stamped insanity. Made a cloud folder, HOI Hellscape. But I wasn't ready for the next chapter. In a stroke of what she called brilliance, Karen proposed a community irrigation system. Sounds nice, right? Except she and Ken rerouted underground pipes, illegally, from nearby wells. Ours included. Our private well. The one Grandpa built with his own 2 hands. No heads up. No permission. Just suddenly draining our water to feed her Zen zone. A maze of rose bushes. I noticed something was off when the pressure tank acted up. Then came sky-high utility bills. Grandpa's tomatoes began to wilt. I confronted Karen. She smiled. "We're all in this together. Water sharing builds community. Lady, no? You don't siphon from a veteran and call it sharing." I checked the system. She'd added a backflow preventer, poorly. I fixed it so her garden line drew from a backup tank I rigged. Full of gray water, dish rinse, laundry runoff, even a little help from the septic pump. I called it community compost tea. Let it steep. She never noticed. Soon, her roses browned. The maize turned mushy. She blamed airborne toxins from someone grilling ribs. I smiled. I waited. Then I flushed the whole setup. 2 hours later, Karen was outside screaming at Ken to fix it. He stormed onto our lawn, fists clenched, demanding access to our infrastructure. Grandpa was just watering his lilies. Ken lost it. I was halfway down the drive when I heard it. Get on the ground. Ken had a pistol out. Grandpa froze. Hose still dripping. Mom came flying out, screaming. I ducked behind the mailbox and hit record. My phone buzzed. Uncle. FBI. Counterterrorism Division. He'd been following our HOA soap opera since Thanksgiving. I texted 3 words. Gun. Grandpa. Now. Asterisk asterisk. He replied, ETA 5. Ken had no idea what was coming. He thought he held the power. Thought we were scared. And for a second, we were. Then came the roar. 2 black SUVs. Tires screeching. Doors flying open. Uncle and his team, locked and loaded. Karen shrieked. Ken froze. The pistol trembled. And just before they cuffed him, the hose slipped from Grandpa's hand and smacked Ken on the shin with one last splash. You want to know what poetic justice tastes like? Swamp water. But just as I thought the credits were rolling, an agent pulled out a folder, looked Karen dead in the eye, and said, Ma'am, you're under investigation too. And it's not just about the water. Wait, what? People always think the story ends when the villain's tackled and shoved into the back of a black SUV. Neighbors clapped. Karen screamed. Grandpa sipped his lemonade while the paramedics checked his blood pressure. But truth be told, that was just the pre-show. Because as Ken sulked in the back of a government SUV like a kid who'd just been told the ice cream truck ran out of sprinkles, the agents weren't packing up shop. Nope, they were just getting warmed up. One of them cracked open a thick folder, flipped a few pages, and turned to Karen with that unervingly calm tone. Polite, clinical, the kind that makes your stomach twist. Ma'am, can we speak to you about your financial activities related to the homeowners association? Karen blinked like someone had smacked her with a frozen trout. Financial activities? She echoed, her voice pitching higher, already brushing up against opera singer panic. The agent didn't blink, didn't smile, just replied, We have records of monetary exchanges, unregistered dues collections, and potentially fraudulent documentation. We'd like to clarify a few things. Just like that, the so-called queen of the pretend HOA found herself front and center in a full-blown federal interrogation. Honestly, I didn't see that twist coming. I figured Ken would get cuffed, maybe lose his wannabe cop toy, and Karen would score a fine for pretending her printer came with judicial powers. But apparently, if you collect thousands in fake dues, strong-arm retirees for their pension checks, and cook up official-looking paperwork, you set off a completely different batch of legal fireworks. And Karen had tripped every single one, stumbling through them like a tipsy giraffe on roller skates. The investigation launched right there on her front lawn, smack dab in the middle of her precious rose maze, which, for the record, was rotting. Seriously, the center had turned into a soupy pit of root rot thanks to sewage runoff and the stench. It made a raccoon throw up. I saw it. Nature itself was rejecting her landscaping. Some agents began snapping photos of those fake HOA rule signs she'd hammered into street poles and tree trunks. One found her self-authored Community Standards Enforcement Manual. Glossy print, laminated pages, filled with gold-like. All patriotic displays must be approved for tone and aesthetic, and asterisk only pastel colors are permitted for outdoor furniture. Bright red chairs incite unrest, asterisk. Then came the neighbor interviews. Turns out, Karen and Ken had been busy. Over 6 months, they managed to rope in at least 15 residents, mostly elderly, into believing there was a new HOA rule requiring biannual neighborhood enhancement contributions. Translation? Pay up, or we'll make your life miserable. They had invoices laced with fake legalese, counterfeit city seals, even an online payment portal linked to an account under Karen's maiden name. Poor Mr. Donnelly, 2 doors down, couldn't hear his microwave ding. Yet he'd been handing over $300 every quarter. When agents broke the news that it was all a scam, the man started crying. Not over the money, but because he thought he'd broken the rules. Sweet Mrs. Patel. She'd repainted her whole house after Karen told her the yellow she chose was too emotionally aggressive. And then came the backflow disaster. Turns out Karen and Ken hadn't just hijacked our well. They'd tried to tap into 3 others, cobbling together a network of underground hoses, janky PVC pipes, and what looked suspiciously like pieces from a kiddie pool pump. One well got contaminated. Another nearly bled dry. It was a miracle nobody got seriously ill. The FBI documented everything. Snapped pics. Took soil samples. Even dug up part of Karen's Zen garden to trace the plumbing, which she met with howls of, "You're violating my sanctuary." Nobody blinked. Meanwhile, Ken's troubles were only stacking. His little toy pistol? Not only unregistered, but flagged as stolen from a pawn shop 2 states away, 3 years ago. Add that to impersonating law enforcement, flashing a weapon, and harassing seniors, and suddenly Ken wasn't looking at a slap on the wrist. But the cherry on top? His fake security certification. He printed it himself. Misspelled certified. Twice. Back at our place, Grandpa settled on the porch, sweet tea in hand, looking like a man who'd just weathered a Category 5 Karen. He looked composed, but I could tell he was rattled. Not by Ken, not even by the gun, but by the audacity of someone turning a peaceful cul-de-sac into a dictatorship overnight. He just kept shaking his head, muttering, "All that chaos, over a hose." That night, I uploaded the footage. Not just Ken and his stunt with the gun, but the whole saga. The phony signs, the fake fines, the HOA scare tactics, even Karen's TED Talk-style rant about bringing moral order back to suburban streets. I cut it like a mini-doc. Snarky captions. Intense music. The whole cinematic flair. I called it Karen's Cult. How a suburban dictator tried to militarize a garden gnome. By sunrise, it had 50,000 views. By lunch, over 200,000. Local reporters reached out. Then a national news blog caught wind. My inbox blew up. Podcast invites. News segments. Even requests to interview Grandpa. He said no to all of it, but let me record him saying one sentence. "I just wanted to water my lilies." That clip blew up online. But right when I thought things were finally cooling off, Ken in custody, Karen facing charges, the neighborhood finally breathing easy again, I checked the mail, and there it was. A letter. Not printed. Handwritten. Perfect block letters on some fancy monogrammed paper. It had my name on it, and it said, "You've embarrassed the wrong people. This isn't over." The board. Except, there was no board. So that meant someone else, someone new, wanted Karen's old throne. And they had just made the dumbest move of their life. That envelope sat on the kitchen table like a live grenade. Grandpa glanced at it, shook his head once, and went right back to slicing an apple with his pocket knife. My mom was already pacing, like we were under lockdown, mumbling about court orders and getting more cameras. Me? I just stared at the thing and laughed. Not because it was funny, but because it was flat out stupid. Loudly, proudly stupid. After all that chaos, some rando had the guts to bring the HOA drama back like this was a cheesy sequel. You'd think after Karen got publicly roasted by 500,000 people online and Ken got dragged off by real federal agents, the fantasy would have died. But nope. Somebody was itching for round 2. And they wanted me to know. Of course I kept the letter, slid it into my HOA Hellscape folder, and scanned it. No prints. Already tested it with Grandpa's old fingerprint kit from his auxiliary police teaching days. But the thing practically stank of desperation, and maybe lavender. Whoever wrote it really tried to sound like they were somebody. The stationery was fake fancy, with an embossed crest that honestly looked like clip art, an eagle holding a rake. No signature. Just the board. But what board? Karen's fake HOA had already been exposed as a scam wrapped in a PowerPoint. Still, this note acted like it came from some secret HOA overlords, holding meetings in garages lit by citronella candles, dressed in robes made from patio furniture covers. It was short, but packed with shady threats. Stuff like antagonism. I printed the letter and slapped it on the fridge like it was a kindergarten masterpiece. Then I grabbed a cup of coffee and got to work. If they wanted a battle, they'd get one. And this time, I wasn't just documenting, I was hunting. Step 1. Figure out who else was dumb enough to revive Karen's failed circus. I tapped into the local gossip line. Retirement neighborhoods don't run on electricity. They run on porch talk and dog-walking whispers. I chatted up Mrs. Alvarez while she walked her little Yorkie. helped Mr. Lin drag out a rebellious trash bin. And sure enough, rumors were already swirling. Somebody had been spotted going door to door with a petition to restore order. Even that wording screamed dictator in training. Apparently, this mystery person said they were stepping in to fill the leadership gap after Karen's takedown. But the real twist? They claimed to have federal ties. That stopped me, because only two kinds of people would say that with a straight face around here. Either they were bluffing to sound tough, or they were talking about my uncle. Yeah, that uncle, the FBI guy who recently dropped in like a one-man SWAT team. The idea that someone was trying to counter that with their own knockoff version of justice was both ridiculous and kind of terrifying. I needed to know who. So I went old school with the surveillance. Doorbell cams, motion lights, neighborhood security networks. Some folks still had theirs synced up from the Karen mess. A few even shared footage with the feds. I scrolled through hours of it. And then, bingo. A guy, mid-40s, thinning hair, walking like he owned the place, clipboard in hand, polo shirt with NCC stitched on the chest. He knocked on doors, handed out papers, chatted with folks. In one clip, he nodded seriously as a homeowner pointed angrily toward my house. I cross-checked timestamps, figured out his route. Then I started knocking myself. Most folks clammed up, uneasy. One even muttered, "I don't want any more trouble." But eventually, someone caved. Sweet old guy, nothing to lose, told me the guy's name, Craig. Craig Donaldson. Lives at the edge of the neighborhood. Works private security. Says he's launching something called the Neighborhood Compliance Council. Turns out Karen gave him everything before the ship sank, and now he's trying to spin the whole operation into something official. Translation? He's trying to polish the scam and pass it off as legit. I went to see Craig. Not to confront him. Not yet. Just to see the setup. And yeah, his house looked exactly like what you'd expect from a guy with a god complex and a clipboard. Flags, surveillance signs, and a custom doormat that read, "Respect my rules or leave." I slipped a flyer into his mailbox, one I made myself. It said, "Fake HOAs are illegal." Right under that, "Ask your lawyer before pretending to be the law." I made sure to sign it, FBI family. If he wanted to drop federal hints, I was more than ready to return the serve. But Craig wasn't just bluffing. He began mailing out NCC bulletins across the entire neighborhood, demands disguised as official memos, compliance check notices, voluntary noise assessments, even a Schedule 4 patio aesthetic evaluation. It was HOA Karen all over again, but this time with a man who probably narrated his own thoughts like he was living inside a Tom Clancy thriller. The turning point? Grandpa got a letter demanding he remove his American flag garden stone. Not the actual flag, just the stone. According to the notice, it breached visual uniformity expectations. Grandpa stared at it for about 10 seconds before grabbing the phone and calling my uncle. I'm not sure what they said, but by the next morning, Craig's mailbox had vanished. One moment it stood tall. The next, just shattered plastic and a lone strip of duct tape marked with the word nope. A warning? A prank? Maybe both. But Craig didn't retreat. He doubled down. One night, Grandpa went to flip on the garden lights, and the whole circuit blew. Fried. Melted inside out. The electrician later confirmed someone had messed with the wiring. Reckless. Dangerous. Illegal. But sadly expected. That night, I installed cameras. Not just your average ones. Hidden setups. Trail cams. Motion sensors. Battery-powered surveillance. And I waited. 4 nights later, I caught him, Craig, creeping into our yard at 2 a.m., flashlight in hand, and what looked like a tape measure. Snapping photos of our fence. I watched the feed, frozen. Not from fear, but from disbelief that he had walked straight into the same trap Ken had. He thought he was above consequence. That no one would challenge his suburban throne. So, I called my uncle. Again. Only this time, it wasn't about arresting a wannabe cop. We were taking down a whole fake regime. And Craig didn't know the next knock on his door wouldn't be mine. It would be federal. Craig's house was practically a suburban fortress. Perfectly trimmed hedges in geometric shapes, driveway scrubbed clean like a showroom, and a front porch rigged with a motion-activated speaker that chirped, "Welcome to the NCC Command Center," every time someone came close. He was all in on his overlord fantasy, the kind of commitment you see in kids playing superhero. Except this guy wasn't 5. He was 46, twice divorced, and about to learn what happens when you pretend to be a god in a cul-de-sac full of fed-up neighbors. When the agents arrived, they didn't storm in. No sirens. No drama. Surgical. 2 plain black SUVs. For agents in clean suits. No flashy weapons. No yelling. Craig opened the door wearing a headset and holding a clipboard, mid-war game. His face went from smug to scrambled in 2 seconds flat. My uncle stepped up and handed him a folder. It wasn't a warrant. Not yet. Just an official notice. Harassment, impersonating a municipal officer, and suspected fraud. Craig tried to argue. Tried to throw out a First Amendment defense. One of the agents calmly replied, "No, sir. This is a you lied to old people and committed wire fraud issue." I stood across the street beside Grandpa, watching the scene play out like the finale of a show we didn't know we'd been cast in. Grandpa just took a sip of tea and said, "Takes a special kind of fool to pick up a cursed crown." Because that's what Karen's fake HOA had become. A cursed crown passed down to one control freak after another. Each thinking they could rule smarter, quieter, better. Each forgetting how loud a retired vet's garden hose can be when paired with some good old-fashioned petty revenge. What sealed Craig's fate came from the inside. A neighbor, Mr. Branson. Soft-spoken, courteous. One of the first to support Craig's petition. He flipped. Turns out, he felt guilty after realizing Craig had been collecting compliance fees as prepaid Visa gift cards. The reasoning? Untraceable contributions maintain the sanctity of the order. That was an actual quote from one of Craig's NCC newsletters. He'd even drafted a charter for mandating visual cohesion, with fines for Halloween decor, garden gnomes, and lawn chairs in bright colors. Branson handed over everything. Emails, recorded convos, even an internal NCC spreadsheet labeled non-compliance fines, projected revenue. After that, it didn't take long. Craig wasn't cuffed on the spot, but the walls started closing in fast. Cease and desist orders went out. Folks in the neighborhood were told to report any more contact from the NCC straight to federal authorities. A full report was filed with the county, and several fraud charges were under review. But what hit Craig the hardest wasn't the legal stuff. It was the whole neighborhood turning against him. Within a few days, at least a dozen houses put up flags, yard signs, even Halloween skeletons. One neighbor painted his mailbox neon green and rigged it with a tiny speaker that blasted circus music whenever it opened. Someone else stuck a pink flamingo in Craig's yard with a little sign that said "Free Bird, HOA Survivor." Even folks who'd kept quiet before started chiming in, feeling bold now that 2 mini-dictators had fallen within the same month. Grandpa didn't say much. He went out to the garage, built a fresh planter box, and carved Liberty Grows Here into the side. We set it smack in the middle of the yard, circled it with flowers, and added a little solar spotlight so it'd glow at night. It turned into a neighborhood landmark. People would stroll by, give a little nod, snap photos. Kids started leaving painted rocks with smiley faces and freedom quotes. One day, someone dropped off a tiny plastic eagle wearing sunglasses. I kept that one. But it didn't stop there. We got a letter from the city. Not a threat this time, a commendation. Turns out the footage of the HOA takedown, along with my video, had caught the eye of some local officials who'd been battling fake HOAs for years. They liked the evidence, the calm approach, and surprisingly, the editing. They wanted to use our story as a training case for municipal enforcement teams learning to spot and shut down shady neighborhood schemes. Grandpa blinked when I read it to him, then asked, "So we're a teaching tool now?" and laughed so hard he almost spilled his iced tea. I posted one last video, kind of a mini documentary called How to Dismantle a Dictatorship with a Garden Hose. It wasn't angry or dramatic, just facts, a little sarcasm, and Grandpa's steady wisdom. It showed clips of fake citations, Craig's absurd NCC rules, and Karen's corn maze slowly breaking down into mulch. It ended with Grandpa watering his lilies, wearing a t-shirt that read "Compliance This," with an arrow pointing to his watering can. The video hit 1 million views in a week. And just when we thought the story couldn't get more poetic, someone knocked on our door. A guy in his early 20s, nervous, holding an envelope, said he'd driven in from another state. He handed Grandpa the envelope and said, "My dad used to live here." He said he'd been too afraid to speak up when the HOA started. But after seeing the video, he felt like he got his voice back. Grandpa opened the envelope. Inside was a handwritten thank you note and a picture of the man's dad standing outside his house, holding a small flag, grinning. On the back, it said, Thanks for reminding me that dignity doesn't have an expiration date. Grandpa didn't cry. He just nodded, said, "That's worth more than any medal," and invited the young man in for pie. That's who he is. Doesn't go looking for revenge. Just doesn't let bullies win. The neighborhood hasn't dared try any HOA nonsense since. The fake warnings are gone. The fear? Gone. The garden's still blooming, brighter than ever. Every Sunday, a few neighbors pull up lawn chairs near Grandpa's porch with lemonade and stories. They call it Liberty Hour. No formal agenda. No titles. No fees. No rules. Just people. Neighbors. A community. And if you listen closely in the evenings, you might still hear the hose come on. A soft hiss, the slow sweep of water over lilies, and Grandpa's voice, gentle as ever, saying, "This is how you keep things blooming." That cursed crown? Buried. Shattered. Swapped out for something real. Turns out, justice grows best when you water it with patience, a little grit, and just the right amount of petty revenge.